Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Our hosts are Master Gardener volunteers for the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene counties, midpoint along the Hudson River Valley. So if you're interested in gardening or nature or just nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, listen in and enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we'll always have something to talk about.
Hi, I'm Tim Kennelty.
And I'm Jean Tellis.
Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We're continuing our conversation with the authors of the field guide From the Hudson Valley to the Taconics.
I just want to say something about the layout of the field guide, if I may. For starters, we've established that the thing is gorgeous and heavy duty and full of information. Claudia briefly mentioned the section before the introduction, but that in itself is a piece of work. It's wonderful. And the introduction, I have never sat down and read an introduction as if it were a novel. And it is that interesting and that challenging that it's leading us in further. It describes not only the goals of the guide, but the history and prehistory that set up the county as it exists today. And as far as prehistory, we may have had them on a couple times, the Tituses, who are geologists who know everything there is to know about the whole world. And they talk about the Columbia County. They're over there a lot doing their research, and it's just fascinating before plants even showed up. So that was kind of cool. Was the goal to build such an all-encompassing description of Columbia County to share your enthusiasm for the place? I mean, I know it's what you do for a living, but it seems like it's a labor of love as well.
I think we probably, each of us maybe had our own tinges of the motivation. I mean, I think we all share something, but I think we also have our own personal ones. And one personal one for me was, I wasn't born here, but I grew up here. And so there was sort of an itch to come back as somebody who's now studied biology and landscape history and look at the landscape in a different way. And part of my motivation was to help other people go through the same process that I had gone through of first seeing the forest just as a blanket of something that looked all the same, and then coming back later and saying, oh, wait, it's not that way. There are nuances here. There's little things in here that we can pick out. Also wanted to say that, as we stated in the preface, part of the motivation is to make people think of this as hallowed ground. Not in the sense that no other place is hallowed, because every place is hallowed. So it's not that Columbia County is uniquely unique, but it's unique just as each of us is unique and each other place is unique. And so we hope that it can lead people here to sort of have more of that perspective on the reverence, I guess I would say, for the land, and perhaps provide people in other places a motivation to go and look at the land and develop their own resources to develop that connection similar to what we've tried to do.
We had talked a little bit in our past segment about how it was so wonderful to be able to jump into a habitat. And I love the fact that you can use the guide kind of holistically, but also just focus on a particular habitat. The photographs are amazing and beautiful. I mean, I could even just leaf through it and look at the photographs. I love the fact that you have it broken down by plant species and animal species. And I kind of fell in love with specific habitats, kind of knowing that they were around me. I wonder we always ask this question, do you have a favorite plant? And it's the hardest question to answer, I think. But we're going to ask that tough question today. If we could go around the room and ask, what's your favorite habitat and why? Maybe it's a stupid question, but I kind of am always interested in different people's perspectives.
I would have to say the hemlock forest. I love the hemlock forest. It feels very different than other types of habitat. You have the shade, the moisture, owls are flying through. It's one of our ancient forests, but also, as we talked about in the last section, an imperiled forest. So for me, it's a very poignant place because it has, when you're standing there, that long sense of connection to the landscape over time, and also a real sense of needing to savor it in the present because it might not be there in the future. So it has this sort of mix of emotional components for me, while also just the beauty of it is something I really love. It's evocative nature.
Might I just ask you a follow-up question? Because we hear people talk about ancient forests, and I love your description. How would we classify? What is an ancient forest?
I think we have to do another pop
Do. We have that, definitely. We have many podcasts. I'm glad you're suggesting that.
But yeah, just briefly, they're not necessarily old growth forests. All old growth forests in our use of the sense are ancient forests, but not all ancient forests are old growth. So ancient forests in Columbia County are those little refuges of forest that have avoided being cut and turned into agricultural fields during the 19th century or even before. And so they have been forested continuously, even though they were not untouched. We don't have any untouched forests in Columbia County. They were used for firewood. People have taken out timber. They might have had animals in there grazing. They might even have made charcoal at some point. So those forests have been used. But the forest as a community continued without being interrupted and having turned into a field or a pasture in the past. So that's what we call ancient forests. And we think it's important to be aware of them because they're now surrounded by these post-agricultural forests that have grown up on the many, many fields that we had during the 19th century.
And obviously they're very different from those, right?
Yes. And our colleagues are busily studying how they are different. So stay tuned. There will be another podcast.
We've established the fact there'll be another podcast episode on ancient forests and we can dig even deeper. But Claudia, what's your favorite habitat?
I'll stick with the forest too, although it's really hard. I have many favorite habitats, but I think I will say the swamp forest, especially at this time of the year. I just love the challenge of getting into a place where it's actually a little bit hard to move around. You got to put on your boots. It feels so wild and so mysterious just because people usually don't go into it. And in a few weeks, you're going to have the marsh marigolds flowering in there, and probably in a few days, you have the red maples flowering above and dropping their red flowers. So, yeah, I just like the mystique of it and the challenge of being in there.
I can talk about, I'm not sure I have a favorite habitat, but one of the most unusual kinds of habitats in the county is the circumneutral bog lake. We have just a few of them in the county, and there are a few more in other parts of the Hudson Valley. These are typically shallow water bodies in limestone terrain. They are fed in part by springs, at least the ones that we know the best. Maybe they all are. The water typically has a pH that is near neutral or somewhat alkaline, and these lakes are known to support a number of unusual and rare plant and animal species, such as fen orchid, rose pogonia, pied-billed grebe, actually a long list of unusual plants and animals. These lakes have lots of unusual features, including large mats of sphagnum mosses that extend out from the shore. These mats float over the water, and a very interesting acidic bog community develops on these mats, and which is so strange. You have this acidic plant community floating over the alkaline water of the lake. They're right there, right next to each other. These are one of the few kinds of habitats in the region where you will find insectivorous plants such as bladderwort, pitcher plant, and roundleaf sundew. But the coolest feature of these habitats, in my opinion, are the peat rafts that drift around the surface of these lakes. They can be anywhere from a meter to several meters in diameter. They're made up of the roots of pond lilies and other accumulated organic matter. They support their own little plant community right on top of these rafts that includes some plants that we hardly ever see in any other habitats, things like cone spur bladderwort and yellow spike rush. The rafts are buoyed by gases produced by biological activity in the decaying peat. The rafts drift around the lakes in the warm months of the year, and then in the fall, when the air temperatures start to decline, the rafts and the biological activity in the rafts starts to decline. The rafts slowly sink to the bottom of the lake.
That is cool. Very cool.
Where they spend the winter.
That's poetic.
And then in the spring, when things start to warm up, the rafts slowly rise to the surface of the lake and continue their drifting.
And are some of these like very old too? I mean, does this matter like build up for years and years and years?
That's a very good question. We haven't studied these closely enough to know their fate, if they're there for a few years or many decades.
It's episode 160, I think. No, that's fascinating. I love that.
And I've worked all over the Northeast. I have never seen this phenomenon in any other kind of habitat.
So when you see it, you know it, though, right? I mean, it's very particularized, specific.
There are ways to recognize a circumneutral bog lake. How would you do that? You would read the field guide.
Very good promotion. And a bog lake is different from a fen, correct? They're very different things, right?
They are.
Okay.
Bog lake is actually a lake, or a ponded area. A fen is more like a wet meadow, but it has very particular habitat characteristics.
Conrad, I think you're up.
I'm sold on Gretchen's. Yeah, and I don't think that the word favorite is obvious.
I know, it's still one of the ones that it's a silly question, but you get to talk.
And I realize that it also depends on one's mood, where you feel like you want to be on a given day.
Today,
yeah, I picked exposed rock outcrops. And these are the areas that you see, like if you go up into the higher Taconics and you get up to where the cover is very low. You have some of this on Harvey Mountain. You have it along the crest between Catamount and Alander, Sunset Rock. You get a little bit of it when you go to the bird preserve in Old Chatham. And one of the things I find so interesting there is that it's very distinct, these open rocky areas, and it has its own organisms associated with it. And those might be, if you're up near Sunset Rock, you might see azaleas flowering in a given season. If you want to go and pick blueberries, you can do that. But I think the real reason is, to be honest, that there's no nicer place to look for rare butterflies than where you've got a great view. So when you're up there and you can find the brown elephants and you can look out over the valley, that just makes a good day.
So you and the butterflies are all looking for the same plate.
Well, there's an interesting thing here about butterflies and hilltops. I'm not so sure. I think the brown elephants are there more for the plants, but sometimes you see other butterflies that are up there that are doing what they call hilltopping.
Oh.
So there's a behavior in butterflies where it's sort of like, I'll meet you at the top of the hill and we'll, see if we get along. So I think it's a way, it may be a way for them to manage their mating. Huh. And so you'll find even little hilltops in fields, you'll find like black swallowtails congregating at the top of those.
Now, once we've passed through the four main groups with the 32 total habitats, there's a couple of bonus habitats. Columbia County is bordered on the west by the Hudson River, which is a whole thing all by itself. The section on the Hudson River is twice the size of any of the other sections, and rightly so. There's so much going on there. And everything ultimately ends up at the Hudson, with all the water habitats and things like that going on. I mean, just it all ends up there. Did this section have a different feel? Because so much is ecological and botany and biology, and you've got animals and bugs and things like that. But now you're into fishland and more amphibia and things like that. Is it a totally different world?
It is different in many ways from the terrestrial parts of the county. Absolutely. We could have certainly written a whole book on the Hudson River habitats. Felt we needed to squeeze things down into something manageable for the field guide. It is a very interesting part of the county, and where you'll find things that you will not find anywhere else in the county in terms of the plants and animals. The Columbia County reach of the Hudson River is freshwater and tidal, with tides rising 4 feet vertically and falling 4 feet vertically twice a day. This makes for a whole array of unusual habitat that don't occur anywhere else in the county. They're rare in the region, they're rare in the state, they're rare in the Northeast. These are everything from the deep water parts of the Hudson to the tidal shallows to the intertidal mudflats and marshes and swamps, the tidal tributary mouths. Very interestingly, the clay bluffs and ravines which border the Hudson, these are places where small streams have cut through the clay deposits that were left there during the presence of the glacial lake Albany, which disappeared 12 or 13,000 years ago. Yeah. These are deep clay deposits, and they are now cut with streams in these kind of dendritic patterns, very, very complex patterns that you'll see on a topographic map in the eastern part of the county, but only along the Hudson River corridor. The Hudson River habitats support fishes and birds and turtles and amphibians and many other animal and plant species that won't occur anyplace else in the county. And the Hudson River, as you know, it is fed by thousands and tens of thousands of streams in its entire watershed. For that reason, a good thing to keep in mind is that everything that we're doing on the land, even if we're miles from the river itself, everything we're doing is ultimately going to affect what's happening in the Hudson. For that reason, in fact, for all of the habitat profiles in the field guide, we include some ideas about stewardship, how to take care of these habitats. For example, for the Hudson River, we have recommendations like reducing or eliminating the use of polluting substances on the land throughout the watershed, removing obsolete dams on the tributaries that feed the Hudson to restore the free passage of fish and other stream organisms, reducing fishing pressure on declining and vulnerable species, minimizing impervious surfaces throughout the watershed, maintaining or restoring a forested landscape wherever possible to improve the quality of the water that's feeding the streams that feed the Hudson, and establishing and maintaining broad, well-vegetated buffer zones along streams, lakes, and ponds in the Hudson River itself, for example.
I think that's really great. I love the fact that you have the stewardship piece in each of those habitats. And I assume that some people don't even know if they live in a watershed, so they could be greatly affecting things not just in their backyard, but very far away into the Hudson River, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always worth reminding people that they are in a watershed.
Yeah.
They're in the watershed of their nearest stream in most cases, and that stream feeds the larger streams, and all of it ends up in the Hudson. There is actually a small part of Columbia County that is not in the Hudson River drainage, but drains eastward into the Housatonic.
One thing more with the Hudson is that how important it's been for people, both in indigenous times and since then. And I think that one of the ways to think of it is as a highway almost. And that has been used and has connected the county to New York City and points farther away for a long time. And that brings up the whole concept of how much the presence of Columbia County has been shaped by its proximity to New York City. And you can talk about the brickyards, you can talk about the ice factories, you can talk now more recently, it's not the Hudson anymore, it's the Taconics State Parkway perhaps, but you can talk about what that influence is. And that's, I think, another theme that the Hudson brings into the picture.
Wonderful. I loved one of the topics at the end, which was ghost habitats, which you say ghost habitats are both a reminder of what is past and a caution about what has come to pass, which is it's very kind of scary to me. And so can you talk about that in terms of ones that are gone and the ones that are possibly in danger as well?
Yeah, again, I think it's both a caution and a source of maybe hope in looking at how much things can change and have changed. Now, of course, ghost chapters are things that have disappeared. And so one of the examples there, and one of the ones that you can use to sort of see the past in the current landscape, are the chestnut forests. Mm-hmm. So as I think most people know, American chestnut wasn't the most common tree, but certainly in certain parts of the county, it was a very common forest tree. And like oaks, it was one of these keystone species for people and for other organisms. So there are a variety of insects, for example, that they believe have gone extinct since the chestnut blight came through here. And that was probably, it was the early first 2 decades, say, of the 1900s. But you can still go up to areas like on Harvey Mountain or other places in the forest, and you'll find sprouts, living sprouts of American chestnut. These grow to a certain height. They usually die thereafter because the roots are able to survive the blight. But once the tree gets above ground and gets to be a certain diameter, it does not. So that's an example of one of these ghost habitats that you can still see traces of if you know what to look for. The other ghost habitat that we talked about is the sand barrens up in this northwest part of the county, up near Kinderhook, where the soil is quite sandy because you have an outwash plain from a glacial creek of many thousands of years ago. And that caused probably the development of vegetation that was not quite what you see at the Albany pine bush, but something somewhat similar. You had quite a bit of this pitch pine. There are reports of lupins up there. There are reports of other organisms that you would associate with the pine barrens. that ecological distinction has now largely been removed by farming, by orchards, and by development associated with the proximity to Albany. But it's also a source of inspiration. So at the Martin Van Buren National Historical Site, for example, they're now going to try to plant a little patch of pine barrens habitat up there. And in part to inspire people to think, oh, this is what it used to look like. Maybe in my backyard, I can put in some of these plants. Maybe I'll even get some of the creatures eventually, but I can put in some of these plants. And in some ways, you're not restoring the habitat, but you're remembering it and honoring it. And I think that's sort of the positive point of where these ghost habitats can come in. And then the last thing, as you alluded to, is that it reminds us that anything that we see today could be a future ghost habitat.
And do you think there's something we can learn from those ghost habitats as far as the things that are in danger today?
Well, I think it was partially our motivation for the Ancient Forest Project, in the sense that here are places, or now ancient forest, we don't quite call it a habitat. It's a type of forest that can occur in a few different forest habitats. But I think the fact that you have these areas that are ecologically special out there now embedded in these large areas of young forest, people don't realize it and they go in and they develop it. So we could, if one did not recognize those areas, 50 years down the road, you could be saying, oh, we once had ancient forest in this landscape.
Or never even know it was there. That would be truly sad. This field guide should appeal to everybody as far as I'm concerned. If it's whether the park in the neighborhood and you could go look up a bug or something. What do you think your audience is? I know what your goal audience is, but what do you think it is so far?
Well, we certainly want to reach a very wide audience. And from the beginning, we understood that we wanted to create a book that worked at a lot of different levels and provided a lot of different entry points. On the back of the book, it says, from the Hudson to the Taconics is for anyone who inhabits, visits, or loves this landscape. So as wide as one could imagine, it is meant to have that easy entry point, whether, as Claudia was describing, you want to just read it casually, whether you want to explore casually, take a walk, get to know the habitats a little bit through browsing some of the chapters. But it also functions as a tool and resource for our fellow colleagues in this field and different landowners and land managers who have responsibilities to steward the land. So we are excited that it can serve all of those different audiences, become a tool that is helpful in shaping how land is managed, become a tool that is helpful in understanding more of the landscape, no matter your level of expertise, and just deepening that sense of connection to place that we keep referring to.
Are you envisioning, or are you already into negotiation for this being used as a textbook? Or can you not tell us?
I should mention that we are very grateful that we've had some partnerships that allows this field guide to be shared widely to further this goal. And so one of those with the Columbia Land Conservancy, and they provided funding to distribute this field guide to a lot of different public libraries, different ways that it can reach into the school libraries and be that resource. One of the real benefits of having the strength of community partners, and another partnership that also helped to get it into libraries, is the Library of Local Initiative, which is a partnership between the Mid-Hudson Library System and the Partners for Climate Action in the Hudson Valley. So we are trying to make it widely available, as well as leading things like habitat walks that invite people to get to know it. For now, it is a standalone guide that people can use in many different ways.
Because I'm seeing the availability is there, and I'm thrilled because I'm a library nut. And if I see a book that's over my $1.25 price range, I'll go get it out of the library first.
And it's great that it's in the libraries. I'm not a library nut. I see it and say, I must have that book. And I will tell you, I was at a friend's house the other night for dinner, and I took the guide and showed it to them. I almost got tackled because everybody wanted a copy of it. So my question is, there's going to be that, I think, interest. So how does one purchase the book? How do they want it? How do they get it?
Yes, so it can be purchased in most local bookstores and gift shops. And there's actually a list on our webpage with all the little places where you can find it locally. You can also order it online or by phone from the publisher, who is Black Dome Press
which is a local
in the
press.
Catskills.
Yes.
Yep. And you can also order it from Barnes and Nobles. So it's widely
Great.
available.
Great.
Easy.
So I won't be tackled now.
And if
Great.
we don't have another opportunity to mention it, I do want to just give a shout out to Black Dome Press, the publisher, and to Ron Tolke, who did the design work. He's based in Chatham, because they were with us from the beginning, nearly the beginning, many years, and did really such an excellent job in shepherding this project to completion. It took so many people to bring it, not just the four of us here, so many interns, volunteers, and others that contributed along the way. So thank you to
You have many
community
thank yous. Obviously, a lot of people contributed.
funders as well.
And I don't know if we've said enough about the fact that it's beautiful. I mean, you talked about how it was organized by the publisher, but the photographs are. I mean, it's beautiful. If you have it and you aren't willing to go out in the woods that day, it's a beautiful thing to look at in your home. Really, it's just gorgeous, the photographs and everything else.
And as a side note, the blurbs on the back of the book, on the back cover, we've interviewed half the people on that list.
So we know
they are the best of the best.
So I think we're ready to close. I'm going to ask you the hope question, if that's okay. We always ask this question, and I don't know if we're putting people on the spot. We were just talking about how we really are interested in different people's answers and different people's perspectives. It's a crazy world out there. We all know it's a crazy world, and I'm sure you're seeing invasive species, you're seeing threats to the environment, as well as just crazy in general. So if each of you could tell us, because I need to know, what gives you hope every day?
I think it's not so much hope as maybe aspirations of transcendence. So not necessarily hope for us personally as much as it's that feeling you get when you're out at night and you look up and you see the stars and you think, they're there. They're going to be there for eons, no matter what happens here, and no matter if there's smog or there's smoke in between me and the stars. And if you go out and you watch birds chirping away and squirrels nattering at each other, and you see flowers sprouting up, you see the kind of the independent will of nature. And just the fact that it's there, I think, brings this idea of transcendence. And now that said, we have to give nature its space, and we can't just see it as sort of a source of economic inefficiency. Another source of hope or positivity that comes from thinking that way, in the sense that, well, where that space comes from is from people having a love of nature. And I think in the interactions we've had around this field guide, you realize there is this innate love of nature. And whether or not that will out in the end, I don't know. But it's like a little green shoot coming up, and you can say, it's there. It gives me a little bit of good feelings on this day.
I'm going to call you next time I'm in angst. Okay, Conrad?
I have a very similar answer. We did not coordinate ahead of time. I would also, redefine the question or reframe the question as perhaps solace instead of hope. And for me as well, it's that sense of larger context that nature and also the stories and histories of the land provide that allow one to have a sense of humility and larger perspective of where one might fit in a large mystery, where so much is not known. And I think that mystery gives me personally a lot of solace.
I'm not really sure how to answer this. I guess one thing I would say is that I have interacted with a lot of people, and I know there is a great deal of concern and enthusiasm and zeal for the protection of natural places. Over the last 20 plus years, I've done a lot of leading workshops and training sessions for people like planning board members and town board members and conservation advisory council members and the staffs of land trusts on topics such as how to protect biodiversity resources and water resources in the work that these people are doing every day. People have been willing to give up days and weeks and months of their time to learn about and to carry out the kinds of protections that they think are needed. It is hard not to have hope when you are surrounded by those kinds of people.
I agree with everything everybody else has said, but it also gives me a lot of joy and hope to see the next generation of naturalists and conservationists both at the Farmscape Ecology program and at Hudsonia to take up the mantle. And we just hired 4 awesome summer interns. People are ordering seeds all around right now. And to create more pollinator habitat, to grow food, we will be putting up a deer fence around a beloved patch of leatherwood tomorrow to protect it from the deer. So there are all these little things that are happening. And I think that gives hope. And I also find hope by rereading the beautiful book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which reminds us of the possibility of a very different relationship between people and the earth. Instead of seeing the land, air, water, and other than human species as natural resources, there for the taking, and only of value if they can be turned into dollars to satisfy our insatiable greed, we could understand them as gifts to be grateful for and thrive to find our place in this world as responsible participants in a long-term, loving relationship with the earth.
Thank you for being here. We know you're all busy and we really appreciate, we love meeting you and talking to you. It's wonderful. And I know our listeners will too.
And thank you all for coming. Hey, you're generous.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Xandra Powers and Devin Connolly from the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thanks to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgv@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Facebook page. For more information about CCE of Columbia and Greene, visit our website or visit in person during business hours at our campuses in Hudson or Acra.
Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal program and employment opportunities in accordance with applicable laws.